Hello, lovely people. Welcome to CMO Therapy, a podcast that's hopefully going to help you navigate your way through your marketing journey. Because let me tell you, I get it. Being a marketing leader is no walk in the park. In each episode, we are going to dive headfirst into the world of B2B marketing, where uncertainty, tight budgets, fierce competition are just the beginning of the roller coaster ride. But guess what? You are not alone in this. Why go solo when you can tap into the powerhouse of insights from some of the most awesome marketing leaders in the game? And look, the title might include the word therapy, but we are not just talking about challenges here. We are tackling them head on. So join us as we deep dive into the nitty gritty, share war stories, and unlock a few secret tips and tricks. Get ready for a no holds barred conversations because sometimes I have no filter. So if you're a chief marketing officer, a marketing lead, or just someone looking to up their marketing game, then I am so glad that you're here with us today. So I'm super excited to have Helen Owen here with me today. Helen, can you give us a little intro, please?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me as well. I'm really excited about this podcast. So I have been in B2B marketing for a little over 25 years, worked in a variety of different sizes of companies, and the last 17 years or so I've spent in the payments and fintech sector, various levels. Last in-house role was CMO, and I'm currently working as a fractional marketing leader in contract roles.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Helen. So today, Helen, we had a little chat beforehand, right? And we decided to focus a theme, which I am going to give you full credit for because I think it's one, which is water-like plans and fluid marketing. I love it. And this is a topic I know we've talked about many times, right, in the past,
Many times.
about how often our marketing plans can and whether they should change, how often they should change. So let's just jump straight into it. So I have a question or a question to kind of kick us off, which is how do you balance that need for long-term strategic planning with the requirement to be, constantly kind of agile and adaptable in today's market?
This is always it's always the most difficult one to answer because I think it's fair to say the answer is always on a case by case basis. So to give you a couple of examples, in my earlier career, I did work in a couple of large corporates. Actually, that was my introduction to fintech before it was even fintech. And what we needed to do there, and then in terms of agility, was very, very different to what I do now, which is mostly working with startups and scale ups where you literally need to be like water. So I think probably this kind of thought of fluid marketing is more relevant in the startup and scale up space than anywhere else, but it's certainly relevant for all businesses. So I think so scale ups is my favorite spot,
I do.
but it is a place where you continually need to balance that long-term strategy with delivery, and adapting to what's happening both in the business and in the market. And the single most important thing that I think you can do to hit that balance is become a partner to the business. So for me, that means you have to try and have a handle on pretty much everything that's going on, both inside and outside the business, which of course can be really hard to do. And you can't possibly know absolutely everything, but you have to have a pulse, a finger on the pulse of, what are both the macro and micro issues and trends that are going on that are going to shape what happens with your business and therefore what happens with marketing. So if you try to kind of set out a plan for the year, like happy days, we all want to do that. We're all expected to do it. And so we should. However, if you think that you can write a marketing plan with all the relevant details for a whole year at a time, frankly, you're a bit deluded. Or you could do it, but you'll just be wasting your time, because I think on several levels, if you're in that startup or scale up environment, for instance, you might still be trying to work out what your product market fit is. You might be changing your ICP because you've been going after one segment for a while and finding actually it's not working, you're not getting traction. Wherever you're trying to sell and market a product or a business, you need to be on that continuous learning journey. And that's where the agility and fluidity needs to come in. So if, for instance, you're trying to make something work in a specific segment of travel, as an example, but then as you start to kind of explore that and the sales team are having conversations and they're finding out actually this little segment of travel needs this very, very nuanced thing because they've got regulation, they've got margin issues to deal with, whatever it is, it's okay to say, maybe we need to pivot back away from that ICP at the minute. And so we need to reflect that in the marketing. Or maybe we do have a market fit there, but it needs really nuanced messaging or product materials or whatever it is. So for me, it's you need to have some structure and some plan, because you can't just kind of go from month to month not knowing what you're doing, because you'll never build any momentum. So by all means, try and put in those strategic principles, but just bear in mind that even the strategic principles may morph as you go through over time. Not at the very top level in terms of mission, vision, those things should have longevity. And no matter how fluid you need to be sort of at the tactical level, you should always keep your North Star in mind and make sure that everything kind of rolls up to that. But staying close to the business will help you determine how much you might need to pivot or adjust as you go along. I think the one caveat I would say to that is don't be the magpie marketer. So I think with some businesses who are in that kind of discovery phase, there can be this kind of, there's two things that often happen. One is this chasing the shiniest new penny thing, where they go, oh, everyone's working with AI, for instance. Let's go and explore that and
Yeah.
say that we tell everyone we're doing that. And everyone kind of follows and then goes, actually, no, I don't think that was the right thing. And then what it looks like as a business is that you don't know what you're doing. And you get this inconsistency in your marketing. And you can't build that momentum. The other route can be, I've totally forgotten what the other route is. I've forgotten the other route. Oh dear.
Yeah, no, I need to pick up on actually, well, if you don't mind, there's two things I want to pick up on what you said actually, because I think they're really, really good, really key. So the first thing you said was, I loved it actually, was you opened up by kind of saying, the business is your customer almost,
Yeah.
right? And this is the thing that's really interesting about, being like constantly agile and adaptable, right? Is that actually the reason we're being constantly agile and adaptable is because of the business changes. That's where we should be closely aligned with the business strategy. The marketing strategy should like hang off of it, right? So the changes, that's where they're being driven from, right? Is kind of the business. So like you said, you gave the great example of the kind of the change in the ICP. I mean, that's a kind of a go to market decision, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, which marketing, or marketing leaders certainly should be involved in those conversations to make sure you stay in touch with it. But you have reminded me what my other point was, which was sometimes you can get business leaders, and I'm trying to word this a bit delicately so that it doesn't scream which companies this has happened with for me. But you can get some business leaders who kind of overly follow their prospects. And just to explain what I mean, you should always put the customer first. However, I've had CEOs who have asked me to adjust the messaging right up to kind of vision, mission, and so on, to specifically address a set of prospects that they're going after, that they're in discussion with at that point in time, because they want to close those deals, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when those deals don't come off?
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're finding yourself backtracking and then having to reposition again. And so it's kind of beware a little bit of being too fluid, because if you do just change tack too often and don't have that top level consistency, it ends up frankly looking like a total shit show. And you do not want that kind of mess out there, because it undoes any good work that you have managed to get done.
But that's where I think, I mean, that's a really nice answer to the question, isn't it? About balancing the need for the long-term planning. Because I think in that instance, I think marketing kind of can be the voice of the let's stay true, like you said, let's stay true to that mission and vision that we have for the company, the overall company goals, where we
Mhm.
want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. Let's kind of keep coming back to that.
Yeah,
And but at the same time, yeah, having the kind of agility to work out. The agility is actually in um, the strategy of how we get there. And I keep repeating this. Actually, I've done a lot of this, like recently, a lot of conversations where the word strategy is kind of like bandied about and
mm.
overused by a lot of people. But strategy is all it is a journey. It's a way from getting from A to B. And that could change, like when you jump in your car and you're working out where you need to get to based on traffic or based on road closures or whatever. Strategy is exactly the same.
I love that analogy. I think that it's a great analogy. The one I often use that's connected to kind of the fluidity is like, a river will always try to meet the sea. The sea doesn't move, but the landscape shapes how that water gets to the sea.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very similar to your point in that it's how do you make sure you carve the right path? And there might be obstacles along the way that you need to account for that you didn't see coming. But
Yeah.
that's okay, because you're still kind of ending up in the right place in the end.
So I do this all the time where I love a little analogy. I love storytelling. We all do, don't we? We're in marketing, and then sometimes I take this analogy too far. But tell me if I'm taking this too far then. But so in that scenario then of your analogy of the landscape, we're a river and we want to meet the sea and whatever, and the landscape's changing. What are some of those signals that we can pick up that the landscape is changing that says, okay, we need to kind of like change direction here?
Yeah. No, I think this is where it gets interesting, because again, my answer is it depends. Um, but I think different touch points tell us different things, and it's about understanding the big picture of how all that fits together. So to kind of give an example, you have to look at your data. So you have to look at how well your sales funnel is responding to what you're doing, what's hitting in terms of your marketing content. Um, I mean, even right down to, are you getting follower growth on LinkedIn? Are people engaging with your adverts? And but some of those are vanity metrics in terms of like followers and website traffic and things like that. Doesn't mean they're not worth anything, but they're a small part of a big picture. So as much data as you can get in terms of performance, engagement, but not just at that, how many people are opening our emails, but actually what subject is getting them, what hook, what pain point, how is that connecting? And I think, again, this is the other part where you need to stay really close to the sales team. Because the number of times where I've overheard a conversation, or I've sat in a call with the sales team and they've said, oh, we had this bit of feedback from an RFP and this is what the customer said. Or I've been trying to beat these doors down with this kind of group, and this is the objection that I've got coming back. Um, so it's combining that kind of continuous learning that's happening via the sales team, but also via your customer success team with
Yeah.
your existing customer base. And then what else is going on in the market? So another example of that kind of anecdotal signal, Um, I was working with a company whose competitor just suddenly came out with a new product set that made them much more in line with what this business was doing. And there was an underutilization of what was previously some of their USP and additional product that kind of helped them to stand out, and now they've lost this advantage a little bit.
Yeah.
So then actually, now that's no longer a USP, but that business has still been doing it for longer than this new product that a competitor has launched. And so how do you then talk with maturity around that additional product to kind of help assert that extra credibility? And the extra credibility and kind of proven product then becomes the USP. And you need to adapt it in your content, in your website, in wherever. So there's things at a tactical level. If people aren't opening your emails or they're not clicking through or whatever, then either use a different tactic, use a different channel, have it as part of a different mix, whatever. If they're not resonating with your topics, then you need to think about adapting those. So there's small things, but then there's also those bigger things in terms of adapting to trends and feedback. And that tends to be more anecdotal.
Mm. I love that because you've got the kind of the data. You started off with the data being like, kind of very data driven, which is right. But then there is also that element. It's like the whole like Word and Excel thing, isn't it? You've also got the the kind of the qualitative stuff as well that you have to kind of dig into. I
Yeah.
remember uh I remember I think my answer would be to kind of almost like have the data driven approach like first to pick up the slight signals, but then also always sort of try and validate those signals with sort of digging into it more of the insights. And the example I have actually with that is where I had one business that I worked for a while back, and um, after changing our kind of inbound, like one of our inbound channels, we saw a 50% increase in inbound leads. And we were like, yay, fantastic, this is really great. And the numbers looked brilliant. But actually then those inbound leads weren't converting. They weren't closing. And when I looked into it and then we sat down with the sales team, and yeah, long story short, we worked out that there was kind of a bit of an ICP problem there, like you said at the start. So, but yeah, I think just using some of those data first to
Yeah,
kind of give you the little bit of a smoke signal first, but then
definitely.
the
I
green
think that's
flag.
a really good point. Is the data can often tell you when something's not landing, but the qualitative stuff tells you why.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, the just you just need the signal. The signal's the right word first, but then
Yeah,
just dig more into the data and start to unpack it.
yeah,
So
definitely.
this kind of brings us on to another point then, which is really interesting, where I think this is kind of the biggest one of the biggest challenges, right, of being a marketing leader then, because you've got these signals coming that you've got to then try and unpack into more of like an insight that's going to help you to direct kind of where you are going to go with your strategy. But then how do you then manage your kind of resources that you have, your team members, the budget and things that you have with that, and where do you make those quick decisions, and where not to?
And it's the hardest part because sometimes I think if you've built a really good relationship through the business, so you can see when you need to adapt and what you need to adapt, then it's how the hell do you actually make that happen? And again,
Yeah.
there's never a straight answer to that. But I guess there are a few things. So you need to have in mind, first of all, you cannot reshape your marketing department every 6 months. That would be ridiculous. So just some general principles that you have to kind of always stick with. I but I think it's always make sure you have a really good handle on your in-house team, what their skill set is, but also what they actually are interested in pursuing further down the line. So what's their career path? Um, that way you also understand what movement you've got with that in-house team in terms of adapting. or indeed where you're going to have skills gaps if you need to make a big enough change or pivot towards something else. So there's that. I think then it's where external resources come into play, whether that's freelancers, agencies, and then it's trying to make a judgment call. Are we just trying something out? In which case, let's look at it as a project, do some testing. That means we don't want to commit to having somebody in-house. We can potentially employ a freelancer on a project. Let's make sure they're, well versed in this area so that they can get up and running, help us with it, and then we'll see where we go after that. So some of it is a kind of try and see if we think this is something short term or we're not really sure. Then if you think you're having to make a fundamental pivot, so one of my kind of keenest areas is where there's a business that's going from startup to scale up mode. They need to get more formality around the marketing function. In some cases, perhaps they've only been going out with very traditional mass marketing approaches, have been very focused on lead generation, but actually now what they need to do is kind of move towards a demand creation approach. That requires a very fundamental shift in how your marketing team is structured, who you have in that team, what they're working on, and so on and so on. So then that's a kind of, right, we're making a fundamental shift. We need to really review the whole team and function and so on. But budgets always have a slush fund. I mean, I think there's no other way, right? You just need to have a fund. You'll have booked in events and things well ahead of time, for instance. Yeah. But I mean, I haven't been afraid in the past to actually pull the plug on events that have been booked for later in the year, but then we've realised, yes, we may have spent a couple of grand on booking that and we'll forfeit that, but that's actually better than ploughing another 50k into there to actually deliver an event that's going to give us nothing in return. So don't be afraid to make some hard decisions if it's in the best interests of what you need to do as a business. So yeah, I think once you understand what you need to achieve, then and on what terms, is it immediate, is it short term, is it long term, then you can kind of look at what you need to do. But as long as you've got that kind of slush fund for slotting in new opportunities, that helps a lot. I appreciate not everyone's in that position though, so it can be tough on a budget.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, one of the things I was going to come back to this at the end, but I want to call it out now actually because I think it's like really important. But I think I'm getting this kind of sense of almost like the ultimate answer to the question of that we started off with, which is around that kind of balance of the long term and the being agile, is actually about decision making. Do you think? And like just almost like like being
Yeah.
quick about making those decisions. Because I mean I must admit that's something like I reflect back on some of the things where like things I wish I would have done a little bit differently. And what it ultimately boils down to is I wish I would have made the decision to do X, Y, or Z like quicker. I should have just done that quicker. I should have just done that quicker.
I think that, but you know that now, right? And I think that's probably just come through learning that the hard
Yeah.
way, like most of us. I mean, we've all kind of, I think most people have kind of learned that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's certainly nothing to be ashamed of. And I always think that as long as you are mixing tried and tested things with some experimentation,
Yeah.
then you'll get there because you've got some steady undercurrents of stuff that's going on, provided you haven't just kind of gone in really blindly and gone, we did that last year, so we just rebook it.
Yeah.
Or this is the way we've always done it, which is the worst possible thing you can do. As long as you're not doing those things and you're always keeping your finger on that pulse, that's the best you can do, really. I think is, yeah, just moving with time to adjust to whatever's happening and learn your lessons in the process. But as long as you learn them, like, don't be afraid to fail, because as long as you learn something from that perceived failure, then it was still useful, right? So you know what not to do next time, or how to adjust what you've done, or whatever it is. And so you still got something from it. And just always try to remind yourself of that, because I know sometimes it's hard when something falls over or doesn't go to plan. You can kick yourself for ages. Just try not to. Just learn what you need to learn from it. Move on.
Move on. Do you know one of the things I remember, right? So back in school when you were doing GCSE science and chemistry, right? It's really funny. I remember all of these lessons, and I'm terrible for beating myself up over things that I've done wrong. But I have these memories of the chemistry lessons where when things went wrong, I absolutely loved it. You know, if something like blew up, you're like, yes, and but let's think about this actually, though. This is really interesting because then I started to kind of unpack and think about this. This was like ages ago. And actually, I kind of run marketing a little bit like science experiments, where you start off with your like hypothesis, right? You've got some data, don't you? And you start off with your hypothesis. I think that mixing this and this is going to result in this. And then you have your method. Do you remember you used to have to, for GCSE chemistry, you have to write all this out. Then you write the method and you write down the resource, not resources, what were they called? I can't remember what it was, but like the things that you were going to use, like resources
Yeah.
basically for it.
Yeah.
But then at the end, you had to write like your theory up, didn't you? Your results.
Mhm.
Actually mixing this and this did nearly blow the school up, and I really apologise for that. But I walked away learning actually never to mix those two things, and I was really excited and proud by that because I've learned something new. So
100%.
yeah, it's kind of like and that's now I think like that's how you run your kind of marketing campaigns, don't you?
Yeah, but also, isn't it through things
Don't
like
try and
this?
blow the company up.
No, probably not. And also, always be careful with fire. Um, but I think it is the right way to look at it. Some of the greatest discoveries have been made through experimentation or
Yeah.
by accident. So, why not? Why not introduce that into marketing? Because you never know what you might find out. And I think that's one of the exciting things about being in marketing. And I'm like you, I think there's a lot of science to it, but I do think it's where science and art meet.
Yeah.
You bring that scientific, that data-led side, that digging into the qualitative and quantitative information that you've got, but then it's injecting the creativity into that to bring it to life. That makes it so satisfying. But certainly for me,
It's going to have those curveballs. You don't know whether, there's suddenly going to be a gust of wind that comes from the window, out the window, and, blows your flame out. Or when, I don't know. See, I told you I take analogies too far.
no,
But
not at all.
you've
But it's
got
right. You do need to be prepared for that gust of wind.
right, we're nearly finished, coming up to time, but I do have one question actually. This is a little bit of a curveball for you, but one thing that I like to do actually before or for each of the podcasts is to ask our LinkedIn network if there's one question that they could ask. If I had a marketing leader, an expert marketing leader sitting in front of me, what one question would you want to ask? So I have a question for you. So sorry for the surprise. But the question is, how do you measure the success of content marketing, especially when it comes to influencing decision makers and how complex the B2B buying process is?
Oh, wowzers. Okay.
Sorry.
Hate to start with it depends, but I will. So I would say the first thing you need to start with, like with any element of marketing, is what do you want to achieve from it? Set it out up front. And I don't mean for every single little piece, because for me, content marketing is not about a single blog or a couple of social media posts or whatever. It needs to be really holistic. And you might have some things that kind of run as threads, and find, really good to take each of those elements and look at some of the metrics and, yeah, write down to some of those vanity things, how much website traffic did it drive? How many people clicked the like button, all those things. Those still give you some element of that picture, but you do need that bigger picture. Where it gets difficult is when you've got a very long sales cycle. So, and actually most of the businesses I've worked in, that is the case. So you need to see the effect over time, as well as that kind of the immediate data. So it's really important to kind of try and set out not just some data metrics, but that kind of objective overall in terms of what is this trying to contribute to at a bigger level. How is it feeding into the overall marketing plan, and measure against that. But I often don't separate it out completely, because I I don't think you need to understand how each piece is running. If you think about, it's a bit of a creepy image actually, sorry about this, but like a marionette, right? If
Yeah.
you think about a marionette, right, you've got strings attached to all the various different bits, and it's those as a whole that help you to move that god awful puppet thing around.
Yeah.
If you cut one of the strings, it affects the overall picture. So it's kind of making sure that all of those work in harmony, and that there's not like one floppy leg that's not kind of doing what you need it to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, get as many touch points in terms of data as you can. Look at both the macro and micro measurements and the anecdotal stuff. And I think for me, the most important key with content marketing is it's all about talking to your audience about what they want to hear. It's answering their questions, it's solving their problems, it is meeting their needs as far as possible. Don't write stuff because it's fun or interesting to write it because it's what your audience want to hear. And as
Yeah.
long as you're doing that, you can't go too far wrong.
And that's it, exactly. I love that. I love that. And that's, I think a lot of sort of maybe marketers sometimes sort of forget that. You get a little bit sort of wrapped up in your own sort of marketing world, don't you? And kind of sitting behind the screen. But
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Like we should be testing it out. Don't be afraid. I always say this, don't be afraid, like even on LinkedIn, to kind of ping it over to somebody that is your target audience and say,
Yeah,
look, I'm just looking for some really honest feedback here. I think, we're all human beings. We don't mind helping each other.
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you so much. So
Oh,
yeah, we're at time now. That went so quickly, and I think we did really well. I'm not, usually our chats are a bit more sweary. Let's be honest.
I was very well behaved, and you even more so.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's so great to be able to, I think, just have these, or to be able to share these chats with everybody. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
definitely.
so much. It was really, really useful, and I hope everyone else found it useful.
Thanks
And
for
thank
having
you
me.
for joining listening to the podcast, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Lucy.